So we have only 15 working days to go till Freedom and Choice kicks in on the 6th of April, and I think we're all looking for ways of learning more and helping us understand how that might work in the UK market, how it might affect the shape and size and scale of the UK market, and how it might affect people's retirement incomes. And in this session we're going to hear from two people who have considerable experience in other markets that resonate with this issue. We have Benjie Fraser from JP Morgan, who will be known to a lot of you, and Jane Perry, who's CEO of Qantas Super. So not Qantas, but Qantas Super, which sounds so much better. So the subject of this session is member engagement, but as you'll hear, there are a number of other areas that we can learn from Australia and learn in terms of how we might develop after April. This session is going to be run as a Q&A session, essentially between Benjie and Jane, and I'll throw in the occasional question, but there'll be plenty of time at the end for you to pose questions to either of our speakers, and we'll come back to that towards the end. So I'm going to hand over, with no further ado, to Benjie, who's going to talk a little bit about the Asian and Australian markets.
Thank you, Jackie. I mean, obviously, what we try and do in this session is link it to the UK in some way, given we're on the cusp of things that Jackie described. I mean, and bring it to something as close as I think we can, which is get some experiences from Australia. But I just first of all wanted to touch on a couple of countries that may be relevant to us getting to some questions I'd love to get the answers from Jane on. The challenges out in Asia ex-Australia, I mean, it's enormously different in the sense that, and enormously similar, it's different in the sense that there's a whole mandatory way that savings are created, and then there's a huge amount of reform into large state pension schemes, which allow one to see that there are similar challenges and very different challenges. So if you look at member engagement, take a country like Malaysia or Singapore, you would be looking at some similar areas of communication challenge in terms of general lack of interest, the low level of financial awareness around literacy, and some of the demographics, if you take a country like Malaysia, are immensely varied. At the same time, in those countries, ex-Australia, they have approached member engagement at a country level. So they are talking about building national consensus in Malaysia, raising public awareness. Have they been able to jump into some areas of improving communication that maybe the UK would look at, such as social media? Yes, definitely. But that's combined with some areas like the use they make in Malaysia of kiosks where you can go and pull down your statement. So some very innovative areas and some areas that are kind of all the challenges you have of these type of countries. In a case of member engagement, does the fact that a contribution is being made for you or by you from a very early age make a difference to engagement? In Singapore it does, because in Singapore you can dip into that fund to help with the you acquiring property, and you can also use that fund to help manage your health in later life. So if I was in Singapore talking to younger cohorts, they know quite a bit about certain aspects of the Central Provident Fund because of the use they can make at an early age to become part of the property owning population. Jane, you've been listening to some of this, given what you've heard, and given you are slightly unique in the Asia markets, and you are indeed unique in a sense as Qantas Super. You have both DB and DC. How does Qantas look at member engagement, and what are the differences between the DB and DC member as you see them?
So
we are unique, as you say, Benji. We have about 7 billion in assets. About a third of that is DB, and the other 2/3 obviously then DC. We've been in existence since the mid-1930s, with the DC component going from around about the time that compulsory superannuation began in Australia. So it began in 92 with a 3% guaranteed contribution from the employer. We're now sitting at 9.5% with plans to go to 12. And I guess interestingly, in the context of discussions here in the UK, despite that many years of that increasing level of contribution, our view is it still needs to go to 15 or 16 before anyone will have a degree of adequacy in retirement. So to the question of engagement, at the very highest level, I think the two groups are actually quite different in some ways and then quite similar in others. So for the DB members in our fund, during the accumulation phase, their contact with us, so if they're driving the engagement with us, it will be about some benefit that they think the company's diddled them out of. It'll be about something that they believe they signed 25 years ago that should still hold, and we can't find the paperwork. For those of you who manage DB funds, all of those sorts of things about historic agreements, handwritten little notes on the side, that tends to be what the engagement's about. It is never about retirement. It is never actually about the balance, and it's never about a degree of connection to what it's actually sitting there for. Through the GFC, or through the global financial crisis, I spent all of my time answering questions around whether the company was stealing their money, could the company get it, could the company tell us how to invest it, was the company paying their contributions on time, and I answered that question. And if you can imagine working in an airline and you fly, and it says on the passenger list that you're staff, and one of our points of engagement is we do talk, and so I do say what I do. I was on an aircraft coming back from Melbourne and I got bailed up by the captain. So you know when you're walking out and everybody's saying goodbye and have a nice day in whatever city it is you landed in. There were two people who were doing that who clearly weren't interested in superannuation, and the captain had come out of the cockpit along with one other member of the crew, and I'm pinned in the galley while they're asking me about the company's intentions with their funds and whether they pulled my strings, so to speak. So that presents us with a really interesting dilemma around how you get them engaged on the things that they should be engaged on. DC is quite different. So the queries through the accumulation phase are typically around fees, investment returns, they're around asset classes, they'll be around options. I've had conversations like with a person in the Qantas lounge who told me I'm in the second one. I said the second, you know how there are those things we can choose? Well, I'm in the second one. So I worked out that clearly they weren't in aggressive, they must be in growth. So I said, oh, you're in growth. And I go, yes, that's what it's called. So they're around points, again, about the balance. The point of commonality, though, is I suspect, like most countries, we have vast numbers of people who just aren't connected at all. And for us, the challenge then is how do we, A, get them connected, and B, early enough get them connected to the sorts of things that they should be thinking about in retirement, and that then also changes. People who've been paying fees and have seen the impact of investment markets on their statements every year, even if they're disengaged, have more understanding about what's going to happen as they get towards retirement than somebody who feels that the company's looked after them. And if not the company, then the fund. So how do we do it? Well, we've done a range of things. One of the things that we do to engage the disengaged is we target the sorts of things that they're interested in. So Qantas people love to travel, and one of our most successful campaigns where we needed to deal with a unintended consequence of a regulatory change. I'm sure you're all familiar with those. We needed to get people to make an active choice to avoid a situation that would have been detrimental to them. So we ran a competition. The competition was done on a boarding pass. It was a business class boarding pass with the member's name on it. And the prize was 4 confirmed business class seats anywhere in the world return. And we had a 24% take-up on this competition. The equivalent of anything like that in Australia is about 6%. And so it was enormously successful and led us to kind of then think about, okay, what are the other kinds of things that we can do? About a month ago, we got approached by one of the largest tour companies in Australia that does trips to the UK, 3 weeks in the UK on a bus, does the river cruises in Europe, and they target people who are 55 plus. It's nice and it's comfortable. They've approached us around, would we be interested in promoting their distressed stock? So cabins they can't sell, but where they don't have enough to be able to offer to the general public around a campaign. So we've said yes, because there's no effort for us. It's a link that's on the website. It's a family and friends offer. And we figure that the more people we actually have who think that Qantas Super is a good thing, whose family conversation is about Qantas Super is a good thing, the easier it is to get the door open to actually have the conversation about the things that matter. We're visible, so I've talked about making myself known on planes, and my team all do the same sort of thing. We also run pop-up booths around locations, in engineering workshops, all of those kind of things. Qantas is, as I'm sure you all appreciate, this is my marketing for Qantas. Qantas has been the #1 safety record airline for many, many years. One of the things that drives that is a concept around culture, around safety is embedded in the culture. And every week there's a safety week. So we've argued that superannuation is about safety. It's actually about safety into retirement. And so we have a booth alongside the medical teams, alongside the engineering teams, alongside the people talking about drug and alcohol awareness. We have a booth that's actually about superannuation. We also run education sessions. So we've run some very successful 55 plus retirement planning sessions. They're face-to-face seminar-style sessions. We've run Superannuation 101 for targeting the younger population, and then we run a series of retrenchment advice support sessions. And then finally, I guess the other comment I'd make is that one of the things that's worked really well for us in the last few years is that we've used real people who are real members to be our images. When I joined Qantas Super, all of our collateral had pictures of aeroplanes. If you work in Qantas, you love aeroplanes, and there's a whole lot of stuff about aeroplanes that everyone talks about. What we did was to take the aeroplanes off and put Qantas staff on. And in the first instance, we did a couple who were cabin crew and their 2 children, and told their story about where they were at in superannuation and their whole savings regime and what they were looking forward to in 25 years' time in retirement. The next one we ran was the launch of a new product, which was mostly going to have new employees and arguably a younger cohort going in. So again, we found cabin crew people like to volunteer. So again, it was a cabin crew guy. He became known as Mr. Gateway. Good-looking, fit. One of the photographs is of him jogging. Another one sitting on a park bench with his dog. Kind of normal things that normal people do. But his story was about retirement. And then since then we've done a couple of others. We've got a lady in her late 50s in retirement who's, the images of her are canoeing, or kayaking rather, in the Kimberley area in Australia, so a sort of a dream destination for many people. And then our most recent one is a woman in her late 40s and her partner in a yoga pose, and talking about the yoga training that they're doing now and the yoga school that they want to run when they cease full-time, or when she ceases full-time work with Qantas. And I think there was an interesting link to the very first session yesterday around the power of the story, because I think we've had more cut through having started this idea of stories about real people and real people that people could connect to. That's just made a huge difference.
So do you segment members at all in that way? I mean, what is your kind of mantra around segmentation?
So we do segment. We use this fantastic tool. It's called Excel. And I spoke, unfortunately for the other speaker, I spoke at a conference in Australia and described some of the things that we'd done with our approach to segmentation, and the speaker who followed me was somebody who was pitching for a massive data management CRM style tool, and we're quite good friends now, but it was a bit touchy at the time because I talked about what we'd been able to do with Excel. We kind of started with Excel because we didn't know what we were going to do or how we were going to do it, and I couldn't then justify the business case that was involved in buying a more sophisticated system, and it'd be fair to say to date it's worked for us. So essentially what we've done is to use exactly the same approach that we've always used, and my guess is you have also. If you've got an error and you've got a segment for a particular part of the population that the error applies to so that you can tailor the communication to that group, we've just used that same technique. So we've done we want all of the 55 plus people in these salary bands who live and work in Brisbane, and we've invited them to the 55 plus planning for retirement seminar. We've done things like, we worked out, fortunately, before we made a mistake, that we wouldn't want somebody who'd been in the DB their whole life sitting alongside somebody who was in accumulation, nor would we want a pilot sitting next to a baggage handler talking about balances and retirement. So we've done it off job, using the job information, the balance information that we actually have, location information, and then have targeted seminars in that way. And then we've done some other things then around specific campaigns that we've run, where we've been able to segment for the people who could respond to that.
And just thinking about it, I mean, just for this group here, I mean, what are the differences you found between the different cohorts, the Generation X, Generation Y? I mean, what has been your experiences in terms of their different aspirations as regards retirement? So
they're quite different, but they're also quite different depending on which part of the scheme they're in or what their history has been. So our baby boomer group, of which I'm part, they're a hugely diverse group. So we've got people in that group who are pure DB, have been DB their whole life. Their only scheme is with us, and they've never thought once about investing. They might have thought about retirement, but they've thought about a lump sum. So we've got that group. We've got a group in baby boomers who are like me, who've had a career in other places and so have part DB, part DC. And then we've similarly got people who've been with Qantas a post-retirement age and therefore have some DB and some DC. And then we've got some baby boomers who are entirely DC. And so back to your question about segmenting, the messages to those three groups are actually quite different when you start talking about engaging around retirement. So there's a bit of artful work there. In terms of the younger groups, we've had more success using the sporting analogy, Mr. Gateway, the young athletic-looking guy, of getting people connected to us by connecting to what they do in their life, than we have sort of through anything else that we've done. Somebody described to me the other day that trying to get a 20-something-year-old person to think about retiring was actually the same as trying to get a mid-career person to think about longevity and aged care, which gave me a whole new perspective on the challenge that actually exists for all of us around. I mean, we'd been exercising our minds around how do you get the younger group to actually think about retiring. Now I guess I've got double the challenge. So yeah. In terms of questions and means of communication, there's probably more use of the website by younger people than there is by older people. But some of that's been driven by what we've got on the website. That's made quite a significant difference.
And I suppose the question for a lot of people in this room will be, how does your member engagement change post-retirement?
It changes substantially probably at the transition to retirement phase is the point at which we start to see the change. So one of the quirks of Australian legislation relating to superannuation is there's a tax benefit once you're 55 associated with a scheme that's called Transition to Retirement. And it gives you the ability to be able to utilise a tax benefit but also continue to accumulate as arguably you wind down full-time work. So it's designed for people who are moving from full-time to part-time, transitioning literally to retirement. And so there's a degree of connection that's possible there. People who want to start thinking about that, or who we've targeted with a campaign about that, want to spend a lot of time. And they want to spend a lot of time talking, and they generally want to spend a lot of time with people who they think are going to know a lot. Now, that generally means the CEO title that I have means they think I know a lot. Well, I know a little bit, but I'm not qualified to give advice. And so our process of how we manage to have that person then connect to where they can get advice is actually quite important. Somebody who's retired and stayed in the scheme, they take a massive amount of time. So one of the things that's happening in Australia at the moment is we've got more and more people in all of the funds who are at the retirement phase is how do you cost effectively run a call centre? When you've got people who can spend half an hour, they don't want the 2 minutes and off the phone kind of treatment, and they tend to call many times about the same thing. And so I think one of the trigger points for us to decide, in fact, to change administrator now about 18 months ago was the capability in the call centre and the ability for the call centre to deal with questions that were advice-based, and their ability to be able to manage somebody who had, I want to say, genuine retirement issues, as opposed to general conversation about, did you read that article in the paper about, such and such that I'm invested in. That's important, and it's important to maintain the connection, but it's not necessarily germane to the task of the call centre every day.
So you touched on something, again, which Jackie in opening remarks kind of is where we're going with the pension freedoms in the UK, which is, I suppose, this balance between education and guidance and not giving advice. The key challenge is just that there's a huge spectrum of financial literacy amongst members. I mean, you've touched on this, but just be interested in more detail about how you navigate this.
So as I said, one of the decisions to change administrator was we wanted the ability to have our call centre representatives able to give limited advice. We'd always been in a situation where previously our call centre teams could give general product information, or what's called general advice, but they couldn't answer anything specific to the particular member. They could just say in English what the PDS, that's a common term, the disclosure, the standard disclosure documents. So they could translate that into plain English, but they couldn't go further than that. What we now have is the ability for the call centre team to give limited advice, so they can talk in a less than generic way around the benefits that the person has on a set range of topics. They can also do a referral then to an advisor. So we've made the decision, again, as many funds have in Australia, although with a multiplicity of models for execution, we have an advisor who sits in our office who is a Mercer advisor. They're covered from all of the licensing and compliance requirements by Mercer, but they physically sit at Mascot with us. And that's been invaluable. He does the education sessions. Once we go beyond general explanation of retrenchment forms, for example, he will do the education sessions. And the beauty of that is we all know him. And so when I'm talking to somebody calls and they decide that speaking to the CEO is going to be the panacea to all of their questions and unresolved issues, then I can do the relationship connection, make it feel like a transfer to this person who they've never met, in a world where financial advisors don't have the best rap, will actually be an okay thing. And so for us, that path of what is education versus what is advice, And how do you, because we're really using education as the leverage to advice, not because we want to make Mercer financial advisors rich, but because we think truly people need advice to be able to get the best possible outcome for themselves in retirement. So we've gone so far as I've done one of the standard compliance courses. I've discovered I can study still and get the calculator out and do all of the tax calculations and answer all of the intricacies of what actually happens at particular ages in particular circumstances. I've really only done it so that I know what I can't say and how do I stay out of the territory and how do I get enough information. If I'm having the first conversation with the person, how do I get it to be a warm enough transfer to Michael so that he can actually pick it up and run with it from there?
So just, I know Jackie wants the questions at the end, but just a couple of thoughts. Just going back to the cohorts and influencing methods of communication, is there a particular favourite sort of, what have you found to be the most effective channels for communication ultimately?
I think we've found the channel has to fit what you're trying to do with it. So if it's education and advice, then it's actually better face-to-face. So we do face-to-face sessions. It's why we do the pop-up booths. It's why we do we do webinars so that we can cover remote locations or small groups of people in particular locations as a way of actually handling that. We have to do from a regulatory requirement perspective in paper information on a whole bunch of issues, so we do that. We've tried to make them look more personalised. They've got pictures of the people I mentioned before on them, all of those kind of things to try and make it a better way of connecting and not have it end up in the bin. We do outbound calling from the call centre, so if we've got particular things where we need to make contact with people, that's hard because if they're not connected, they don't want to take a call. And so that's less successful. But if it's a complicated issue that's associated with an error, for example, we've found that a more useful way to actually manage the situation. One of my funniest experiences was on a group of close to retirement people who we had made a mistake. We'd overstated their benefits. If they could read the statement, they would have been able to figure it out, but I'm not surprised they couldn't figure it out. So we'd arranged a whole bunch of sessions. We had advisors talking to them in every city and every location, and then we got a phone call, and it was from one person. So we identified them off the list. Yes, okay, we know who this call's got to go through to, and then he said, "I've actually got 10 of my mates with me who've got the same letter." So all of a sudden we found ourselves in a situation where we had 11 people in a room together at one of the airports, all of whom had different numbers, different balance issues, different personalised, tailored communication, who were all talking about it. I was thinking about that yesterday when we were talking about what will happen when young people who disclose much more personal information generally than older people do. It was very difficult for us to deal with. How do you deal with the privacy regime? How do you deal with answering a specific question when you've got 10 of them in a room and they're all then attempting to explain to each other what the answer to the question was?
Interesting what social media will do to this. I mean, just finally, for everyone here, I mean, what do you think are the greatest barriers to member engagement?
I think the greatest barrier is getting to people before they need help. So getting to people early enough in their career that they can still make contributions. We don't have anybody who, without thought and planning, could head into retirement. Even our long-term DB members with guaranteed outcomes in a world where they may live until they're 90. They probably should have been making additional contributions way earlier. And so for me, it's around how do you get the message through around there are some choices around what you can do to set yourself up for retirement, that if you leave it, our house view would be that if you leave it much past mid-30s, then the amounts you need to contribute at the point at which there are expensive children going to university and all of those sorts of expenses occurring in a household, become quite difficult to manage. So I think the hardest thing is getting the connection early. And I think for us, the key to success has been making it personal, making it people's stories, making it something that people can connect with. If I told my story about what I'm doing, people would go, "But yeah, you work in financial services, you understand all that stuff." When it's a pilot talking or it's a cabin crew member talking, then it's quite different. There's instantly a degree of connection. And then I think finally, I think it's going to be interesting, given the history in Australia. Sometime soon, we're going to have people in Australia who've been in DC their whole lives, who will be able to fully fund a retirement that lasts well into their 90s, and that'll be an interesting story to tell.
Thank you.